non-votes and counted them as yes votes. And so their constitution, their government, was born in this cultural illegitimacy. You know, not only was it just undemocratic, it's just or anti-democratic, frankly. And part of this, admittedly, comes from the stress that the Roosevelt administration was under. We know about the 100 days. It wasn't just 100 days because that was a nice round number. It was 100 days because we need to get a lot through before our proposals get cut. So this went through fast, and this is also the source of a lot of the conflict that Hualapais had with their own government for most of the 20th century. So this is the gentleman Sam Soskagame in World War I. Some people say that it's in France. He came back, well, he didn't come back. He died in the war. When they brought his body back, the American Legion in Kingman named their hall after him. They may have changed it since then, but they named it after him. They had a big parade in his honor, calling him a war hero, etc., etc. A couple of other folks that were important in Hualapai history. This is the cantankerous, irascible Fred Mahone, and those are the words that his people used for him. The words that the Bureau of Indian Affairs used for him would make us blush. It was really, they called him a socialist, a troublemaker, an anarchist, a drunkard, a fool, an idiot. So I wrote in the book, sort of as a quip, that if you're getting the BIA that angry, then you're doing a good job. And then another gentleman, Jim Fielding, who was also part of some of these early 20th century political organizations. Again, the Mahone Museum of History and Arts, wonderful photographs there. I just put this in the book just because I liked it, and the press was willing to go along with it. But Millie Grover, and I did some interviews, just talked with her great-granddaughters, or granddaughters, and they remembered her with that truck. They remembered her. So I just loved it. Here's a woman, a native woman, at that time at least in her 60s, driving around in her car. So it says a lot about independence. She wanted her own independence, even though she got a lot of flat tires. This is just a wonderful, wonderful photograph. So kind of getting towards the end here. World War II and post-World War II developments. Native people, particularly Native men, had one of the highest rates of volunteer service in all parts of the military. Extremely, extremely high rates. About 100 Hualapais served in World War II, and then women served in wax and waves. So World War II is a big turning point for Hualapais. It's a big source of pride because many volunteered because they did not want Hitler to invade. They didn't want the Axis powers to invade. They said, this is our country. And so it's not hard to wrap your mind around this in some ways. It's like, why would Native people volunteer to fight for the government that has arguably marginalized, colonized, and dispossessed them? Well, one of the big things that Hualapai said is that, well, we're U.S. citizens now. We are U.S. citizens, so there's tremendous patriotism. The other thing that they said is that we've been here longer than you have. So if anybody's going to protect this land, we are. We've been here for thousands of years. So you've got to, it's complicated. Again, it's one of the favorite comments of historians. It's complicated. Sometimes it's used as a dodge. Sometimes it just really is. In 1941, before the war started, they resolved this huge court case with the Santa Fe Railway that had been going on since the 19th century. The court case actually started in the 1930s. The land dispute had been going on since the creation of the reservation. They won this court case in large part because of Fred Mahone and Chief Justice William O. Douglas, who wrote the majority opinion, basically saying it was a travesty. The point that there are basically two big points. One was that Hualapais did not agree explicitly to give up their land that was given to them, that was given to the railway. So this was an improper and unjust takings. So that's the first thing. The second thing that was amazing about the court case is that the court heard oral testimony. The court heard oral history. And that was, quote, provable fact. It's astounding. It's astounding. Because when we think about oral histories or oral testimonies or oral cultures as being highly susceptible to mistakes, the court said no. These are people who have a very intentional, explicit, methodical process of not just remembering stories, but a technique of storytelling that's specific to specific people that are trained essentially as historians. So it's not just the general memory of the culture. It's specific people were chosen as children to serve this purpose and then were taught to carry these stories. And so this court case is astounding. This court case became a basis for many land rights claims in Canada and New Zealand and Australia. We don't know too much about it. It's not really taught in the Indian law schools. It's growing and growing, but it's an incredible case. After World War II, the growing sense of, quote, nationalism, this idea of Hualapais are a tribe, but they're also a nation with a government, control over land, tribal membership, which is kind of tribal citizenship. While at the same time, they're dealing with another policy from the federal government called termination and relocation. Without getting into it, the name just sounds pretty ominous. The short story is that they want the federal government, Republicans and Democrats, for very different reasons, wanted to liquidate the reservations, erase them, absorb them into county, state sort of taxes, et cetera, and then move people off the reservations through a relocation program, move them into the cities. And then, of course, and one of the biggest ironies of American Indian, if not US history, that the federal government put Indians on these, quote, wastelands of reservations, and then after World War II, it turned out that they were sitting on a third, roughly, of the continental United States deposits of uranium. And also oil and gas. So if you've ever driven through Navajo country, you'll see all of these things. So the Atomic Energy Commission made many trips to Hualapai to do tests. And for decades, they debated this. Some Hualapai said, yes, let's do it. It's for the national defense. We want to stop the commies. Some of them said, no, it's going to cause pollution. And then later on in the 70s and 80s, there were discussions about accepting uranium waste. This caused big divisions and disputes among the Hualapai, but ultimately they said no to both of those things. So what became of Fred Mahone? So after he helped win this court case, he ran for tribal council once or twice. He lost miserably because he was mean. He was cranky, bullheaded. So they said, well, why don't we send him off the reservation to do something productive? And so he became the Hualapai member for the founding of the National Congress of American Indians. And the National Congress of American Indians is a native version, closely, more or less, to the NAACP, roughly speaking, focusing on land rights and things like that. And so he's down here. He looks pretty grumpy. But they figured, we've got to do something with this guy, and also we've got to get him off the reservation. So he represented the Hualapai to Congress and to the president. And the NCII still exists today. And so that's what he did for several years. So the Tribal Council in the 1950s tried to deal with some of the problems that came out of that kind of unjust voting process. They revised the Constitution in 1955. Then they revised it again and again and again, I think most recently in 1999. It expanded the powers of the Tribal Council. And then one of the things that the council was doing was focusing on economic development, in particular cattle ranching and the timber. And so my point that Hualapais didn't dislike all white folks, they asked this judge to consult with them about their constitution, because they wanted to try to see how the Constitution could fit in with the United States Constitution and facilitate government-to-government relationships. One of the most controversial things after World War II, as if uranium mining wasn't complicated enough, was the proposal to build the Bridge Canyon Dam on the Colorado River